principal market is key, and the car industry is desperately short of engineers, and its success will be choked if we can't get the skilled labour it needs. And if we're honest, parents are more willing to do some jobs, such as picking fruit and vegetables. A spring onion producer told me he can't rely on local labour to get the harvest in. So we make sure horticulture is not destroyed by taking back control without being able to meet demand for labour. These aren't easy things to say in public, but we are about to make a momentous decision. The Prime Minister says we've got to make a success of it. That in turn will only be achieved if we are honest about some of the problems we face. I am no starry-eyed Europhile. The political leadership in Europe failed to inspire its citizens about the benefits of working together, and other countries are seeing the rise of the extreme right parties who promise to solve their problems. Now, this goes wider than Europe, and the leadership of the rich nations around the world are struggling to find the answers to globalization. For the low-waged. In America, Obama tried to extend healthcare to the poorest, and here we have the introduction of the living wage. But maybe it is to places like Scandinavia we need to look for better models of wage equality and fairness in society. These are the big questions left when we exit the European Union, and we will need to answer them in our own way. I expect the EU will change after we're gone because it must collectively try to find answers to the big questions of globalization, mass migration and robotics. But in contrast to the US, we've decided to turn outward, not inward, partly because we have to and because our heritage is one of trade and exploration. I hope the electorate will be patient, but they will judge our efforts by their experience, not our rhetoric. And I hope that all that is great about Britain is not sacrificed in pursuit of an unrealistic ambition to go back to some mythical time when we were in control of all we surveyed.
Jim Farron. Mr. Speaker, she's not in her place now, but I just want to pay tribute to an excellent maiden speech by the Honourable Member for Sleaford and Internationalists. It was the Liberals who backed Winston Churchill's European vision in the 1950s, even when his own party did not do so. Since our foundation, we have been champions of Britain's role in the European Union and fought for cooperation and openness with our neighbours and with our allies. We have always believed that the challenges Britain faces in the 21st century, climate change, terrorism, economic instability, are best tackled working together as a member of the European Union. Being proud Europeans is part of identity of the party. It's actually part of my personal identity too. Personally, I was utterly gutted by the result. Some on the centre-left are squeamish about patriotism. I am not. I'm very proud of my identity as a Northerner, as an Englishman, as a Brit, as a European. All of those things are consistent. My identity did not change on the 24th of June, and neither did my values, my beliefs, and what I believe is right for this country and for future generations. I respect the outcome of the referendum. The vote was clear, close but clear, and I accept it. But voting for departure is not the same as voting for a destination. Yes, a narrow majority voted to leave the EU, but the Leave campaign had no plans, no instructions, no prospectus, and no vision. No one in this government, no one in this House, no one in this country has any idea what the deal the Prime Minister will negotiate with Europe will be. It is completely unknown. How then can anyone pretend that this undiscussed, unwritten, unnegotiated deal in any way has the backing of the British people? The deal must be put to the British people for them to have their say. That is the only way to hold the government to account for the monumental decisions they will have to take for the next 2 years. I'll happily give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. Does he not think his party is actually partly responsible for the outcome of the referendum, because immigration became a proxy for issues like this pressure on the NHS and the inability to see a doctor, the inability to get into the right classes because of policies his party supported that squeezed public services and meant people look for someone else to blame?
I'm staggered by the honourable gentleman speaking the language of Nigel Farage. What a terrible disgrace. The deal must be put to the British people for them to have their say. That is the only way to hold the government to account for the monumental decisions they will have to take over the next 2 years to ensure that the course they choose serves the interests of all the people, however they voted. So here is the likelihood. I won't take any more interventions. Other people need to get in. Here is the likelihood. Here is the likelihood. We will have 48% of the people not liking the outcome of the deal, and half of the 52% will feel that they were betrayed by the outcome of the deal. The only way to achieve democracy and closure is for there to be a vote at the end, because the fact is the Prime Minister is the one making the strongest case for giving people a vote on the deal. She had the choice to pursue a form of Brexit that united our country, that reflected the closeness of the vote and sought to heal the divisions between Leave and Remain. Instead, she chose to pursue the hardest, most divisive form of Brexit, which tears us out of the single market, that leaves us isolated against the might of world superpowers. Never mind that 6 months ago she herself argued the case for remaining in the EU. Never mind that numerous campaigners championed the Norway and Swiss models and spent the referendum campaign assuring voters that we would not leave the single market. Never mind that 48% of people, 16 million British people, wanted to stay in the EU. Never mind that Britain's young people, who have more of a stake in our country than most of us here, voted 3-1 to remain. The Prime Minister has made her choice. Fine. She has chosen hard Brexit. But if she is so confident that what she is planning is what people voted for, she must give them a vote on the final deal. What started with democracy must not end up with a government stitch-up. When all is said and done, the decision on whether the deal the Prime Minister negotiates is good enough will be decided by someone. Someone will make that decision. Should it be the Prime Minister? Should it be those privileged to be here? Or should it be the British people who have to live with that decision? I say it should be put to the people in a referendum. That is why the Liberal Democrats are fighting for the British people to have the final vote on the deal that this government negotiates. Democracy. Democracy means accepting the will of the people at the beginning of the process and at the end of the process. Democracy means respecting the majority, and democracy means not giving up your beliefs when the going gets tough.
Streeter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman. He always speaks with passion. But can I just put it on squarely on the table that I will never vote for another referendum while I'm in this House, given what we experienced last year. Now, I agree with those who said this is a conscience vote. Forget the three lines. This is a conscience vote. We asked the people, what do you want to do? They said leave. As far as I'm concerned, that settled the matter. I will, of course, be voting for the bill this evening. I want to make three very quick points, Mr. Speaker. First is that I believe the Prime Minister deserves personal credit for her leadership on Brexit since she emerged last July. Cast our minds back to the extraordinary events of last summer. We were shell-shocked, not knowing where the public vote would take us. Brexit means Brexit, she said, and we're going to make a success of it. That phrase, much mocked in some quarters, gave a sufficient sense of direction to steady the ship. It became apparent by January that we then needed a more detailed plan, and at just the right time, the Prime Minister gave her Lancaster House speech. It set out a clear, coherent and credible plan for the way forward. It was one of the most significant speeches I've heard in my 25 years in this House. It was a game changer for me and for many people. The plan is ambitious and not without risk. And in particular, we'll be leaving the single market, turning our backs on free movement, but seeking to negotiate a free trade agreement. That is a high-risk strategy. But I recognise that to remain in the single market would not properly reflect the desire of the majority who voted leave to control immigration. It is, however, vital that in putting in place a bespoke free trade agreement that is successfully completed as part of the overall deal. The one fear that companies in my constituency have is not so much tariffs, bad though they might be, but it's non-tariff barriers which can play havoc with sensible trading arrangements that must be avoided if at all possible. Now, one part of the Lancaster House speech has received insufficient attention, the reference to transitional arrangements. I know that there are some in this chamber who think all this can be done in the blinking of an eye, but it cannot. It is complex, it will take years, and we have to exercise patience. Once we start detailed negotiations, once we start to consider which parts of the acquis we want to ditch and which to keep, We are probably, Mr. Speaker, looking at a 10-year project. We might well leave the EU in 2019, but we should prepare ourselves for substantial transitional arrangements and hopefully thereafter a positive working relationship. My second point, we must now be brutally honest with the British people about the likely short-term impact of Brexit. Not in an alarmist way, but simply making the point that because of uncertainty, because we have now made clear that we will not be in the single market, there is likely to be an impact on government spending for the next few years. We know that tax receipts have fallen against forecasts since June, and that trend may well continue. It may well be that there will be long-term gains of Brexit. I certainly hope so, and we must strive for that end. But there will most likely be short-term pain, especially now that the phony war is coming to an end. International companies will weigh the certain knowledge that we will be leaving the single market against the hope of an equivalent free trade agreement. And some of them who crunch that calculation will decide to invest or expand elsewhere. Some financial institutions are already getting itchy feet. So there might be not as much money available for the NHS and social care and schools as we would like to see over the next 2 to 5 years, and we should prepare the British people for that fact. And my final point, very briefly, is that living in these very turbulent times when all kinds of issues are going on in our world, I would encourage the front bench, those who are negotiating, we've got a clear plan, but don't be slavish to it. Let's be flexible and wise.
Odds. Speaker, it's with great pleasure that I rise to speak in this debate on this historic day for Parliament and for this country. None of us who believed in withdrawal from the European Union believed that we would ever see an order paper in this House containing the words European Union Notification of Withdrawal Bill, second reading. And I think it's a very historic landmark occasion. It is about implementing a decision which this Parliament decided to hand over to the people. And it would be utterly wrong, therefore, to reject what the people of the United Kingdom have decided in a national vote. I utterly respect those who have spoken, who campaigned hard, enthusiastically and vigorously to remain, but who are saying we must respect the will of the people since Parliament handed that decision over to the people. I have little time for those who argue that we should now engage in procedural games, that we should engage in means of thwarting the will of the people. I think it's dishonest. I think it's undemocratic. I have to agree with what the leader of the Liberal Democrats just said about believing in democracy and listening to the will of the people. Well, then let's get on and implement what the people have said. And let us not engage in efforts to thwart what they have said. This was a national vote across the United Kingdom. Everybody's vote was equal. I want to address the issues that affect Northern Ireland particularly, because it's been said that Northern Ireland voted to remain by 56 to 44, and therefore Northern Ireland should not be part of the withdrawal from the EU, or there should be some special status. I can think of nothing that would be more calculated to undermine the union between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom than for Northern Ireland to be able to thwart the will of the people of the United Kingdom as a whole. That would be deeply anti-unionist position to take. I think it's right and proper that we respect the special needs of Northern Ireland. We are arguing those vigorously with government. We're engaged in this House through ministers back home, and that's why I deplore the fact that at this crucial juncture we've had the bringing down of our locally devolved assembly and executive needlessly. And then the people who brought it down are the very people who are now making speeches saying Brexit undermines the Good Friday Agreement. Thankfully, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland has completely demolished that argument and made it clear that there's nothing in the Good Friday Agreement, the St Andrew Agreement, or any of the agreements that have been made that in any way is impaired or imperiled by the decision to leave the European Union. But for those who are now complaining the hardest about Northern Ireland, they're the ones who have denied themselves a voice by not coming to this House to take their seats and argue their case and engage with ministers. And they have now brought down the elected government in Northern Ireland, so they don't have any input in that way either. The reality is that, of course, these present challenges for Northern Ireland. But the fact is that when we remained in sterling and the Irish Republic joined the euro along with other European partner nations and states, we were told that this would be a massively detrimental act, that this would cause all sorts of major problems on the island of Ireland, that this would lead to all sorts of disruption, economic and political. None of it happened. People adapted. People were told we'd have to change our currency at the border. And there is a different currency in Northern Ireland from the Irish Republic. But trade continues. Trade is flourishing. The economy has gone on and done extremely well. None of the dire predictions of those who predicted terrible consequences came to pass. And I am confident that in relation to this issue as well, that we will see a better future for the United Kingdom and for Northern Ireland. I welcome very much the Prime Minister's commitment to maintaining the common travel area. I reject the idea of a special status for Northern Ireland. I'm glad the Taoiseach of the Irish Republic also rejects it because it is code for separating Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom and undermining our...
Speaker, this is indeed an historic moment in our nation's history. This is the moment we begin to take back control of our laws, our borders, and our money. Once again, we become a sovereign nation state in command of our own destiny, and I am absolutely delighted about that. For I was brought up in post-war Germany. I campaigned to leave in the 1975 referendum, and along with 43 others, Mr. Speaker, I voted against the Single European Act in 1986. So I have form. Alongside the Honourable Member for Bolsover, the Right Honourable Member for Islington North, I am the last remaining member of that band. So although Margaret Thatcher pushed for that bill, I have no doubt that if she were with us today, her response to this bill would be rejoice. I pay tribute to all those who have campaigned over the years for this outcome on all sides. And I do salute also David Cameron for honouring the commitment he gave the British people that he would give them a referendum on the membership of the EU. Many said he would renege on that. He kept his word. And that referendum, Mr. Speaker, was not advisory. It was an instruction to withdraw from the European Union. This bill simply authorises the giving of a notice to leave, without which negotiations cannot begin. It is touching to hear the newfound respect for parliamentary democracy from the opponents of this bill. They're the same people who for 4 decades have been complicit in the relentless campaign to transfer power from this parliament to Brussels.
Does my honourable friend not agree? Having asked the people to give us their voice, we now need to respect that voice and get on with it.
Absolutely, and I think that there is an overwhelming view not only in this House but across the country for that proposition. A number of speeches during this debate, principally yesterday, have sought to rerun the referendum arguments. But it's no good complaining that people didn't know what they were voting for. The government spent £9 million of our money on a brochure riddled with inaccuracies and mounted an extraordinary and utterly counterproductive Project Fear campaign, warning of dire consequences if we voted to leave, none of which have come to pass. My right honourable friend who sits in front of me, the former Chancellor, predicted immediate and profound economic shock across the country and a DIY recession, none of which happened. Instead, the economy has grown by 0.6% in the third quarter of 2016, compared with 0.3% in the first quarter before the referendum. Major companies like SoftBank, Google, Novo Nordisk and Nissan have all announced significant investment in the United Kingdom. Some have argued that the public was not told that a leave vote would require us to leave the single market. But recovering control of our borders and restoring to this Parliament responsibility for the laws of these islands, i.e. a return of sovereignty, was at the heart of the debate. Membership of the single market is completely incompatible with those objectives. As my honourable friend for Boston and Skegness said yesterday, the people knew what they were voting for, and it is patronising to suggest otherwise. Some suggest that the validity of a referendum in which over 33 million people voted is in doubt. Such question troubled them in 1997, when Tony Blair secured a majority of 179 with just 13.5 million votes, and by contrast, 17.4 million voted to leave the European Union. We are leaving, and there will be no second referendum. Mr. Speaker, we undoubtedly face challenges ahead, but don't let's kid ourselves. There would have been major challenges if the United Kingdom had voted to remain. And there are 70 billion reasons why our EU partners will want to reach a mutually beneficial trade deal with us, because they have a £70 billion trade surplus with us. And I hope that those who in large part owe their liberation from the Soviet yoke to the Conservative government of Margaret Thatcher will respect our decision and help us forge a new constructive relationship. And I hope the same will apply to those whom we helped rebuild after the Second World War. And freed from the EU customs union, we will be able to embrace the world, negotiate trade deals with our Commonwealth friends, encouraging fair trade deals and the tiger economies of the world. However, it will be hard graft. The US may be our closest ally, but commercially there will be no pushover. Another note of caution, the EU's determination to create an EU defence identity shows no sign of relenting, and such a policy presents a direct threat to the ultimate guarantor of European security, NATO, and risks alienating NATO's principal paymaster, the United States of America. I shall be supporting this bill tonight.
Murray. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have been a member of this House for almost 7 years, and rarely have I spoken on a bill of such great importance, not just to the country in Scotland, but to my own constituents. And it is a great pleasure to follow the right honourable gentleman from Aldershot. And whilst we fundamentally disagree about our views of the European Union, it's right that we're able in this House to express those views on behalf of our constituents and the country. And if that's what taking back control is about, let's talk about that democratic process, because we are only here today, and we were only here yesterday, because the public in this country were able to take this government to court to express their views that the government were railroading through a decision in this country without due process and without the taking back control they promised to this Parliament. And we should pay tribute to them that we're here able to make these arguments on behalf of our constituents. I campaigned vigorously for a Remain vote, like many members and honourable members in this chamber. Indeed, someone who campaigned alongside me night after night, Mr. Speaker, was one of my party members, Gordon Dalziel, the son of Tam Dalziel. And if I could just pay tribute to Tam in the few seconds that I have, and say that our thoughts are with Gordon, Pam, Matthew, and the rest of the Dalziel family. But the reason I campaigned so vociferously for the UK to remain a member of the European Union is because it's in our national interest to do so. When I was tramping around the streets of my constituency in 2010 and 2015, I wasn't knocking on doors promising my constituents that I was elected to this House, I would do everything I possibly can to make their lives poorer. Indeed, the new Chancellor of the Exchequer has said quite clearly on the record that nobody votes to make themselves poorer. So it's incumbent on everyone in this House throughout this process, not to just railroad this bill through as if it doesn't matter, but to fight for every single amendment on this bill to make sure that this House sends a strong message, both to the government and to our European partners, that we will make sure that this country gets the best deal for our constituents. I won't give way, if you don't mind, because of the timescales and other people wishing to speak. Mr. Speaker, at the end of that process in terms of the EU referendum, 78% of my constituents voted to remain. Now, many arguments across this chamber in the last day or so have talked about not respecting the will of the people, not respecting the democratic will of the people. But as far as I'm concerned, and according to Erskine May, we are representatives of our constituents. None of these decisions in this House are taken easily. In fact, it's with a heavy heart that I will vote against triggering Article 50 this evening. But I'll do so in the knowledge that I can walk down the streets of Edinburgh South and look at my constituents in the eye and say to them that I've done everything I possibly can to protect their jobs, to protect their livelihoods, and to protect the future for their family. But when this bill goes through, as the bill will, because we know the bill will go through after third reading and through its passage to the House of Lords, I'll work enthusiastically to make sure that we can get amendments to this bill and we can hold this government to account. Because Brexit might mean Brexit, Mr. Speaker, but to my constituents and to many people across this country, Brexit doesn't mean Tory Brexit. And the rhetoric we've been getting from this government is wrong, and I don't know why they're fighting the people to stop this Parliament having a say, and I don't know why they're not reaching out across this chamber to try and get a common sound and a common voice to make sure that Britain can get the best possible deal from our European partners. I will vote no this evening against triggering Article 50, but be rest assured I'll spend the rest of the time in this chamber making sure I fight for my constituents' lives.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For calling me to speak in a debate I never wanted to happen, and for a vote I never wanted to cast. This summer I would have been an MP for 30 years, supporting the pro-European cause with a passion, and I don't think I need to elaborate. I believe that the referendum at the base of this bill today has become an inevitability. I supported David Cameron's call. I may have been wrong. I envy the steadfastness of my right honourable friend, the member for Rushcliffe, and the consequence, therefore, of his vote on the bill. I'm in a different place. I voted for the referendum bill believing its result would count. I made a bargain with the good people of North East Bedfordshire on public platforms, arguing to remain, that we would honour the result of the referendum. If we voted to remain, that would be that. And if we voted to leave, I would support the decision if I was required as an MP to vote on the matter. We are, and I will. I'm not giving up fighting. I want to see the very best for my constituents out of the new arrangements. That's why I stood for the Brexit Select Committee. And while in Parliament and beyond to assist the government which has been landed with this to make the best of it. I don't believe that this bill provides much opportunity for the addition of detail to government future negotiation. The government needs a pretty open hand, though one or two amendments might help the government in retaining parliamentary support. I will fight for a negotiated settlement, watching carefully for any sign that no deal is moving up the agenda. I want the government to be as open as possible to as many options as possible. The degree of detail to be covered is staggering, both for us and our partners, and new consequences are being uncovered every day. It is way more complicated than some of our colleagues ever wanted to believe, and all its consequences will not be beneficial. But there's one fight I want to see an end of, and on which I'm calling time. I don't believe there is any realistic prospect of the UK remaining in or rejoining the EU, certainly not in my lifetime in the House. I think it's time for me to place my support for the EU and for Europe on a different footing, one which recognises the reality of what we've done. So I'm going to work for the future prosperity of the EU, for our partnership relationship with it, for all the things we must continue to do together from that new position. I will defend it against those who still wish it further harm, from those misguided enough to believe that the